So welcome to our session. It's going to focus on major regeneration. Thank you, Lars, for such a wonderful introduction for all of us, and very specifically as a response to the pace of urbanization that we are all facing. We at ULI are always driven to understand success and lessons learned. As developers, designers, investors, and public officials, we are now seeing new challenges and opportunities beyond those that we have learned to address in the past. These challenges relate to technology, mobility, climate change, resilience, and social integration, but it's made more complicated because they're all interwoven with each other. And we are operating in a time when virtually all governments are finding their own development and investment resources stretched beyond the limit, leaving important projects on the table, not on the ground. Lisette Van Doorn, as part of the preparation, said, there is now a disconnect between infrastructure and urban development. How can we recouple these? And how can the public and private sectors work together to meet the common aims of sustaining thriving, vibrant, reliant, carbon neutral, and inclusive places? Just a small conversation for this afternoon. It's a challenge, which is why I'm delighted to share the stage with these four gentlemen. Manfredi Catella, chairman of COMA, who will discuss his experience with Porta Nuova in Milan. I look forward to that. Bill Chilton, architect, colleague, and principal at Pickard Chilton, who will speak about the Global Gateway Shinagawa project in Tokyo, a rail-related mega project. Michael Spies, who was Mr. Europe for so long. Oh, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Who was Mr. Europe for so long, has now come back to New York. We're glad to have him. And if you haven't seen it, as of 2020, he is now in a new firm, which he founded, and will tell us about, called Fuse Strategies. And Pascal Smet, Secretary of State of the Brussels Capital Region, who will offer the public sector perspective. May we kick it off?
We start?
We start.
All right. Do you mind if I stand up?
Yes.
Thank you. So thank you for inviting us today. We're all living an age which is passionate and challenging and bring us to rethink the paradigm to change cities. So let me go through with you a little snapshot of what we did in the last few years. First of all, let me share, 2 weeks ago I was in Copenhagen with my wife, and we were at an exhibition of photograph, Lauren Greenfield. This is Generation Wealth. And these few photographs were showing a recent period of our life, which was the 80s and the 90s, that has generated a certain culture, a certain set of values, and generate a certain type of cities, such as this one or this one. So our belief is that until yesterday, 2008, we were really in a capitalism paradigm. And there are a few words there that you can all read. Then suddenly, we had a cold shower, which we all know what cold shower was. And in history, when these things happen, normally you bounce back in a very strong way, and you have new themes coming out. So I don't think I need to comment this nor that, which is a Milanese Bosco Verticale that Lars also showed. But maybe these are a little bit radical sometimes. I'm not sure that this is the city that we will want. Then we go to technology. We all think about technology, but maybe this is not the city that we want. And as well as about flexible use. Flexible use is important for sure. It's a new way of using our real estate. But maybe sometimes we're going too fast, too far. So the point is that it's normal that we're living a period of strong radical themes, but we believe we will need to find a new paradigm, which is a more of a post-capitalism paradigm and is more of a looking for balance. And balance is very difficult. It's very easy to pick a battle and make that battle, but it's very difficult to find the right combination. So when you have to regenerate a city, there are many more variables that you have to think, as we all know. So let me go through what we did in our organization, because of course you need to reset your vision and your values, and the culture is the number one. Then you have to adapt your organization, and then you have to have pilot projects. So of course we started from United Nations principles. Then we create a think tank, I will comment on this, and we start to create our own methodology to how we can be disciplined in facing regeneration and how we can take care about the many more variables that we have to face every time we develop. And we need pilot project. We have to test our thinking, our new methodology. So we set Coima City Lab, and I'm very happy that Chris is here because he's part of it. But we create a group of friends helping us thinking forward. It's not easy to develop cities. It's much more difficult than in the past. Certainly, many more things than when we were thinking Porta Nuova, for example. With Coima City Lab, we develop a frame in order to how to approach when we have to develop whatever site, which has a neighborhood scale. Then we develop our own approach, and we say, okay, when our team has to buy a site and develop, what do we have to think about it? And as you can see, this is a woman, it's not a man, so there is a little bit of philosophy behind the center of where we think generation should go. But anyway, people in nature, of course, we all say that it is important. This is an important dimension. It's not about technology, of course. It's about knowledge and services. Beauty and happiness is something that we normally don't speak because it's not measurable, but it's very important when you develop a project. And ethic and inclusion is real. It's not just to say that we do something good. No, we have to believe it. So it starts from culture. And only this will provide performance in the proper definition of performance, which is not just financial. Ultimately has a financial performance, but it's not just it. So we went, let's see here. We are start mapping architects around the globe. We're working with 140 architects in this moment that are participating to several tenders, and we start seeing certain sensitivities. Nordics are very sensitive to nature. Italians should be sensitive to people, at least for our past, and so on and so forth. So let's move to pilot projects. Now, Porta Nuova is now partly part of the past. And let me go with a video quickly, so at least for those of you that didn't have the pleasure to come to Milan can see Porta Nuova. If you can please put the video. So this has been a great honor for me to dedicate many, many years of my life together with Gerald Hines, Michael Top, and Lars that is here, and many of us that work on this. This was a big railway yards. Impossible, but we did it with passion. We did it with great commitment, and Porta Nuova today is one of the most successful neighborhood, certainly in Italy, probably beyond Italy. And in the last year or so, we completed roughly 2 billion of acquisition to extend Porta Nuova. So we are now thinking how to continue the legacy in a much broader scale. And let me give you what scale I'm referring to. So this is a Porta Nuova as of today. So it's about 10 million people. So suddenly we realized something that I think you discussed in the morning, that us as real estate people forgot that in our building there are people. And in our neighborhood we have 10 million people every year, which means that we can become an operator at district scale, which is a completely different work comparing to real estate. And this is what we're doing on Porta Nuova today. In terms of the next generation, how Porta Nuova is expanding, and these are the 2 billion investment that I was mentioning, this is what is happening. The 3 and the 4 are what is happening in terms of expansion. To give you a scale, This is a scale comparing to two other areas that are well known to all of you. And this is what is happening. We're working with the municipality to connect multiple development in Milan, which are not only from us, a sort of an alliance among developers and investors. And the last one is the former site of Expo, and in between there is a railway corridor that are simultaneously developing. And this is the scale that is happening in this moment. So thank you.
Good afternoon. I'd like to begin my remarks with a short anecdote. It had been 52 years since we had seen one another, and when he walked across the hotel lobby, I instantly recognized him. Broad smile, very gentle demeanor that I had remembered 5 decades before. And all that had changed is really just time. And Naoki Saito, in 1965, left Tokyo as a high school student and joined my family in Chicago and lived with us for a year. And today, in his 70s, he lives near Shinagawa Station, which is just south of Tokyo Station, maybe about halfway between Tokyo Station and Haneda International Airport. In a small world of coincidence, Picard Chilton is involved with leading the master plan for Global Gateway Shinagawa, as well as designing the first phase of the project, which is a large mixed-use development. Global Gateway Shinagawa represents about 1.25 million square meters of development, over 13 hectares. The site is 1.6 kilometers long. It will restitch this part of the city that has been bisected by the rail lines, in particular between the development and the area to the west, Takanawa. Unique as a single owner, our client, East Japan Railway Company, or EJRC, is one of the largest passenger railway companies in the world. However, due to decreasing population, changes in work patterns, technology, the development of self-driving cars, the need for railway transportation in Japan is expected to decline. In response to this, EJRC is diversifying its services to become not just a rail company, but an IT company, financial services company, and particularly relevant to what we're talking about today, it is directing its focus on urban transformation, and more specifically, re-envisioning their rail stations as destination mixed-use developments. Their business and social objectives are very clear. First is to improve the quality of cities. Secondly is to improve the quality of transportation and promoting tourism. And the third is to become an international hub for business. Global Gateway Shinagawa absolutely hits the sweet spot of that. The goal of the 4.5 billion euro project is first transforming the Shinagawa district into a vibrant mix of uses, and in this historic area of the city to become a center for global exchange. Secondly is connectivity to transit systems, certainly the relationship to Haneda International Airport, which is just 20 minutes by train to the south. The third is creating community through a vital, human-scaled, pedestrian-oriented public realm, which is, as our client told us, is something that is relatively new to Japan. Fourth is a design rooted in place. And given the dynamic qualities of the site, the flow and movement of people and of trains on a site that historically was actually the shoreline of Tokyo Bay. And then finally, responding to resiliency and sustainability by integrating a robust, sustainable infrastructure that would withstand and be a refuge for the community in the event of a natural disaster. It's the first program first project in Japan to participate in the climate positive development of the C40 Cities Initiative. And it's one of only 18 projects globally to be committed to a net reduction in operational carbon emission through smart management of technology, of waste, and transportation. Further, Shinagawa Station will be the home of maglev train, coming online in 2027. The significance of that is it will reduce travel time from Tokyo to Nagoya by 60%. To give you a sense of scale, what that means compared to the high-speed rail between Amsterdam and Brussels, it would cut the time from an hour and 50 minutes to 40 minutes. For Global Gateway Shinagawa, the independent blocks of the master plan are conceptually analogous to the Japanese archipelago, which is made up of 6,800 islands. On the left here, you see Japan, and then on the right is a diagram representing Global Gateway Shinagawa. What makes it unique is that it's connectivity at a regional and global scale. And from a design standpoint, the unprecedented expanse and quality of the public realm that defines the master plan. The signature organizing framework of the master plan is the promenade shown in orange here, an elevated flowing 1.6 kilometer long pedestrian pathway that represents a stream of movement through the site, connecting the buildings and the blocks together. The promenade is the single most important component of the project. 3 factors have influenced the architecture, and that is the relationship to the rail station and public plazas. Secondly is the floor plate size, which in Japan, quite large. In this particular project, it's between 5,000 and 7,000 square meters per floor. And the height restrictions of 150 to 175 meters, which is in response to the proximity to the flight path of Haneda Airport. The heart of the development is Ekimachi Plaza, which links the rail station with a 6-story podium and the Shin Tokaido, a narrow retail pedestrian-only street which links it grade 3 plazas. The importance of Global Gateway Shinagawa and what it embodies from a business and symbolic perspective really cannot be overstated. It will establish Shinagawa as the preeminent district in Tokyo, perhaps even in Japan, furthering development and spurring the creation of business and culture of international prominence in the heart of one of the world's great cities, Tokyo. That's the rail station on the lower portion of that.
Okay. Well, we're in the 35th day of the existence of Hughes, and more relevant to this panel, and I can assure you I was a relatively late addition to the panel, so I'm going to speak to something in less depth, but referring back to work that Tishman Speyer has done in San Francisco. Hughes doesn't yet have a video prepared, but sorry. Okay, so consistent with actually what we've heard, this is another project that involves railway lands, and actually one of the things that I think we'll find in any city where you are, you think about the opportunities over an extended period of time for redevelopment. Clearly, port property, railway land in many cities around the world has been the focal point for a lot of very important new development. So this is a 30-year history now, beginning in San Francisco, which over those same 30 years, it really has experienced an amazing transformation. It has become, it's probably one of the cities that's been most affected by technological advance. And this was really the opening of the southern part of San Francisco, which had been railway land. Everything in purple there and the green encompasses an area known as Mission Bay, which beginning in 1996 came into play because the baseball team for San Francisco was moved, or approval was public approval was given to fund the creation of a stadium in downtown San Francisco on the waterfront. You see it just, but beneath the orange line, Oracle Park. And that was, the old stadium had been on the outskirts of town. This was really very underdeveloped, partially barren land. It was far from the minds of any citizens of the city. The city viewed this redevelopment and the master planning that was done as a means to open up more access to the waterfront, create more housing, extend the city when growth was beginning to appear. The growth that came into play as .com took hold was far beyond what was anticipated. But in the meantime, between 1996 and through the present, of an original plan that was to create 6,500 units of housing and about 4.5 million square feet of commercial space and a 2.5 million square foot campus, a research campus for the University of California in San Francisco, that's all been achieved. I'm going to speak now to Mission Rock, which is shown in green, which was the last piece, which was, again, former, I should say, by the way, the land had been controlled by the Southern Pacific Railways, which participated with the city in a master planning exercise in the late 90s, early 2000s, and this development occurred over many years. But it was the slow maturing of this zone, and by the time several years ago when it came to thinking about the planning for the last piece, the green piece, the city actually had a moment to pause and reflect on what it had achieved with the first master plan and what might have been, what could be improved. And there wasn't a lot of satisfaction with the actual pull and activation, the public access to the waterfront. Open space, while it had been anticipated, wasn't particularly effective. A lot of the housing, clearly housing pressures in San Francisco have been tremendous. So what had been a 30% allocation of affordable housing in the original master plan, they wanted to try to achieve more than that. Sea level rise came into much greater consciousness in the meantime. And so the real objectives on the city part were to try to improve open space and access to the waterfront, to increase affordable housing opportunity, and to achieve mixed-use development. And in the process, in approaching this remaining site, which really was the parking lot for the baseball stadium across the water, there was a recognition that the density that had been approved in the earlier stages of Mission Bay could probably be improved if, in fact, more effective public spaces could be created. So what was done by the Tishman Speyer team in San Francisco, engaging with a team of architects led by Jeannie Gang, who then led 4 different firms who collaborated on a plan to achieve all of those objectives. This now is a rendering of the first phase, which is entering construction now, but the creation of a park, the waterfront park, which is immediately across from the baseball stadium, and sort of creates a nice continuation of public spaces around the stadium that's been created. The major broadening of streets and pedestrian, street level opportunities for seating and retail were done in a way which was allowed, which was done with more emphasis on the public interaction with the space. And as you can see here, it's not so clear to see, but in the foreground, these buildings are slightly taller than those in the distance, and that represents not so much a slight increase in total density, but a greater increase in the design density, allowing for more open space between the buildings as well. So this is a mix of uses. It will include 1,200 apartments, 40% of which will be affordable, and about 1.4 million square feet of offices. And I think that, as an example, just following on the earlier examples, one thing I think that the interesting thing is that the city, in responding, I should mention, in response to the changes in climate, the level of this land is being built up an additional 4 feet, or about 1.25 meters, and the park along the edge is obviously being designed to deal with conditions that may see it flood. So San Francisco has actually, because it's on the water, been for several decades now forced to consider its resiliency and has built up its perimeter, and this is a continuation of that. So I think I'll leave it at that, and we'll continue.
Thank you. Pascal.
Thank you, Marilyn. They asked me to explain some experiences that I had in Brussels, and I see some of you thinking, Brussels, isn't that boring, Brussels? Is that something going on over there in Brussels? And let me tell you, Brussels is not boring at all. We have 25,000 cultural activities a year. We are a medium-sized city, 1.2 million people on 162 square kilometers. But I don't know if you know, but we are the most international city of Europe, even more international than Amsterdam or London. And we are the second international city in the world. And it means that Brussels doesn't have a dominant culture. We are a city of minorities, and that means that everybody who is in Brussels can express itself, can talk his own language, and everybody of you who has been in Brussels will know that. And you know, Brussels, once again, people would think it's boring, nothing, things are going to happen. But once again, if you come to Brussels, think about something. It's not love at the first sight. But we all know of our private lives that love at the first sight never lasts. So if you come to Brussels, give yourself a little bit time to fall in love. And once you fall in love, it will never go out there. And we will make sure that it will be even better in the future. You know, ladies and gentlemen, that an identity of a city is determined by its people, by its buildings, and by its public space and the interaction between these three things. I talked to you about the wonderful people of Brussels, you know, that the only thing we have in common is Brussels. That is what unites us all, because we are so from different origins. The buildings, you know, that we were, the capital, still are, the capital of Art Nouveau. Art Nouveau was founded in Brussels. We still have wonderful heritage. And I have to be frankly and honest with you, the last 20, 30 years, we didn't have that much landmark buildings being built in Brussels. But I can assure you, we, the new Brussels government, want to change that. And we want to get more ambition. And we want more buildings with, intriguing buildings with a face. Landmark buildings, smaller, big ones, but you know, buildings where you want to make a difference. But about buildings, It's very important when they come that you have a good quality, not only on sustainable level, that they are not being built for 20, 30 years, but that they have to be built for 100 years again, as they did in the past, but also buildings that are very well integrated in public space. And I want to talk today a bit more about public space and the lessons that I have learned of the work I've been doing in Brussels. You know, a city is about human encounter. A city is about human activity. And when people meet each other, they get cultural activity, they get economic activity, they have love activity sometimes hate activity. But, you know, Brussels used to be a place like this. Brussels, after the war, decided that it was going to be a modern city, a car-oriented city. But, you know, being a car-oriented city means that you construct buildings, flyovers, that you have parking places like this. But you think that people meet on a square like this? Actually, we transformed it in this. It became a car-free square, a place where kids play, a place where people actually meet. Another example of this, another typical square, it's a small one, it's not a big scale project like in San Francisco, but it's now becoming like this. Another one I want to show you, this is a shopping street actually. Do you want to do shopping in this street? But like this, you want to do it. And my point is, public space is very essential in a city. Because in a city, it's all about quality of life. It's about quality of air. And, you know, it's about places where kids can play. And if these things don't work very well, you don't have a good city. You can have very beautiful buildings, beautiful landmark buildings. But when they are not integrated in your public space, they are worthless because people will not like it. They will be isolated. They will not feel good in that city. There will be no trust in public authority. So what we have to do is make this interaction between people, buildings, and public space essential. And that wasn't easy, because transforming a city from a car-oriented city into a people-oriented city, that's a difficult thing, because being a car driver is something that's in the DNA of people. But I believe that it was important, and I'm going to explain you why. You know, as a politician, you have to practice what you preach. And I know it's not always the case, but you have to do it. So when I said to people, you don't have to drive with your car, you have to use your bike, you have to walk, you take public transport. Of course, I had to do it myself. In the beginning, people were surprised. But you know, if you walk and you bike to your work, you know how we greet each other in the morning when we do that? We say hello. You know how a car drivers say hello in the morning? Don't take a picture. That's the way they do it. And that's the big difference. It's a cultural difference. And the way we build again, the way we construct public spaces makes that difference. So I thought it's very important. And the first lesson I learned by doing that is never talking about mobility. Talk about quality of life. Talk about quality of air. Talk about living together, space for kids where people can feel good. And then people will listen. If you say you have to leave your car behind because we want a better city, people say, yeah, it's good. Not for me, for my neighbor, but not for me. But if you talk, we want quality of life for everybody, then it works. So that was the very first lesson, talk about the objectives. The second lesson I learned in politics is that a politician, and it's not fashion these days, I know, but a politician should dare to make people happy against their will. We all are in pursuit of happiness. And the essence of political life for me is that you show leadership, that you have a vision, that you have an ambition, that you have a dream for your city. But in order to realize that dream, you have to dare to swim against the tide. And if you have a good project and you want to make your city better, in the elections, they will say, yeah, it's good. And I'm going to show you another example. Well, that's not the one I want to show, but that changed. This too, you see, changes, a lot of changes in Brussels. Another one, you see, lots of people. You know, we are a very good football team now. And this is the one I really want to show. I know the one of you who has been in Brussels probably know this road. It was between Roger and Gare du Midi, just in front of the Bourse, 4 minutes walking from the Grand Place. It used to be a highway in the city. 10 years ago, it was 4 lanes, 2 in every direction. Then they changed it in 2 lanes, in 1. And then we said, no, we are going to change that. We are going to cut traffic in the city. Everybody against it, except the young professionals, a minority in the city said we'd like it. But some politicians said we have to do it in the general interest. Today, we are 2 years later, was not that well executed, and now this work is going on. And what do we see now? Lots of people over there. We see lots of real estate projects coming. And so that's another lesson that we have learned now, and that I learned, and I want to end with that, is that it's so important if we shape cities, and we can shape cities, we have to do it together. And we have to be honest, developers in many cities are seen a little bit dubious. It's like, these guys, they want to make big money, they have these projects, do they really like general interest? You see the press and things, not that easy. I think that's the wrong attitude. You have a very historical and social responsibility, because by the buildings you construct, the public space you make around it, the way you integrate it in public space, you are creating, shaping the identity of a city. And we, politicians who are responsible for city life, we want cities with a good identity. So that's where we have common ground. That's where we can go together. So my thing is, and what we want to do now in Brussels, is not to see developers as enemies or things that you have to be very distrustful with. Let's talk about projects together, right from the beginning. Accelerate from our part the procedures to deliver permits, but from your side to make sure that the things that you are building, constructing, is something that makes city life better. And so that's where we can have a win-win, and that's the way that we in Brussels want to do things in the future. So I resume, first thing I learned is try to make people happy against their will once in a while. Secondly, talk about quality of life. And thirdly, never forget the importance of public space in a city. A city without public space where people can meet is not a real city. That's a place of distrust, a place of individualism. And today, in the world where people distrust each other, it is so essential that we see that public space is the living room of us all. And let's work together to do that. And I end with this now. Really, you're going to come to Brussels next year. I understand. We are going to work together with you to make it a very good edition. I heard from the people of Amsterdam that this is the very best edition ever. Well, sorry, Amsterdam, we are going to make it better next year. Thank you.
Fantastic shift in scale, but also in the kind of things I think we would like to talk about here. Yeah. When we were preparing for this call, you mentioned that over your years of working on very large projects, where there was cooperation, things were a little bit easier, they were still daunting. Now it's become, in some way, a more radical practice. Would you talk about that a little bit?
You mean vis-a-vis of the public sectors?
Yeah.
Well, I think it's, as I believe we all share, now developing is becoming even more passionate than in the past, and at the same time more complex. So public sector has the same challenge, I believe, than the private sector, because first you have to adapt organization. So as all of us are evolving, when you have to deal with different regeneration scheme, much more integrated, more inclusive, and so on and so on, mobility rather than environment. Now, even the expertise that you need are different. So there is a matter of knowledge that you have to build in the organization, no matter if they're public or private. Secondly, there are rules. And the public sector obviously issue the rules, and many of the rules that we all live in are old. For example, in Italy, you have to build a certain number of parking because there is a ratio that you have to respect, no matter if people drive or not. And this creates a situation that needs to be readdressed, but obviously needs time.
So it's different.
It's very different.
Has the composition of your teams during the design process and in working with client, has it changed because of these factors? And I think because of the strong commitment we are now feeling about social integration?
I would say the composition of our teams is I would say generally the same. I think what's different is how we engage with cities and city planners and communities. That is changed for the better, I would say. I would say there's more of a sense of partnership when we are working with cities and neighborhoods and communities. But the composition of our team, I would say, I think it's sort of the education and experience of the team that comes into play as we get involved with these projects, whether they're in Tokyo or Amsterdam or Chicago.
Marilyn, let me make you an example in
Yes.
terms of organization. We now have a team of, you were speaking about public space. We now have a team of 10 only animating a park culturally. Technology, we now have a people of 4 only doing technology applied to cities, not because we are technology fanatic, but because you have to integrate a certain expertise. I don't talk about environment because it's quite obvious now, but we do have, there is a lot of interdisciplinary and more expertise to be a developer than before. Very, very much.
So places don't just happen, they're made. They're made by hard work. How is it working with a baseball team?
Well, interestingly, baseball teams are very customer focused, right? I mean, they're in the business of creating a fulfilling experience for people who come together in a stadium, right? And of course, they're in the business of winning games, but they are increasingly, they have been in the business, the same business. It's another form of everything that we're all looking at as we create buildings or spaces of any type, right? It's really, in the end, the bricks and mortar are objects. It's the animation that the people bring that we all are increasingly aware of, right? So good development is all about envisioning people in the space as opposed to creating the space. So interestingly, the engagement with a team like the San Francisco Giants, they're very, very customer focused, and it's just another form of what we all are doing.
How? I was recently visiting Lisbon, where a very young head of the transportation department said, in many ways we hear the same thing. If we have goals for 2050, then 2030 is now. We have to get going. And in Lisbon, they have a very aggressive program for literally taking all kinds of cars off the street, finding the places where 10 to 20 at a time we can actually remove cars from the streets. But yet, every time we go out to talk about this in public, at least in the United States, a suit is threatened. I'm going to sit here in my car all night so you can't take it away. You're smiling, Bill. And Pascal, how do we make this work?
By not stressing the fact that you're going to take cars away, I think you have to talk to people and say that you want to improve quality of life, and by doing it. And we have different examples now in Brussels where people, as I said, it is a very car-oriented city, and so people want to drive with a car, they want to buy a bread with their car, you know, and still even today there will be people saying by that. But when you realize these projects, and they are high-quality projects, people will immediately see that it is better. You know, something strange is going on in European cities, and to a lesser extent to American cities, is that in some way we are going back to the past. But because if you look to European cities 100 years ago, what was there? Hardly any car. Lots of people who were on bikes, lots of people who were walking, lots of streetcars on the streets. What are we doing now in all these European cities today? We are putting people back on bikes. In the beginning, separated, secured bike lanes. Afterwards, it will be no more cars, only for people who cycle. We are putting streetcars back, tram lines back into the city. We are encouraging people to walk. And finally, we are saying the car is a wrong idea. You know something? I think in 15 years, kids that will go to school probably will learn that the biggest mistake that mankind has ever made was the invention of the private-owned car to transport people. The car, I know you're all silent, but it's reality. Think about it. The car killed so many things. Someone in a car never buys something. You know, when you're in a car, you don't have this spontaneous thing of buying something because you cannot leave your car like that. But if you walk and if you cycle, you can do it. And what we are now seeing in European cities is that this younger generation, like in American cities, not in Brazil, not in China, not in India, but in Europe and in the United States, the younger generation is saying, we don't need any more car. Because my parents maybe grew up with the idea, my car, my freedom. But today, it's my car, my traffic jam. And you don't need your car as a ticket to a girlfriend anymore. You know, a car was sold by the car industry as a way of successful living and to get an easy access to your girlfriend. Today, it doesn't work anymore, you know? And so, today it's different. It's more on a bike. So it's all culture, actually. And we are going back towards to the past. And it's once again, quality of life. And I think what people really want today in Europe and the United States is a quality of life, and they understand that you don't get it in a car. They want sharing. We have car sharing, bike sharing now. We have the step sharing. We have all these sharing systems, and people know that sharing is caring, and that's the future. So we have to get the privately owned car in cities out of the cities, and it is possible. And you know something? It's good for your health too. And everybody is busy with his
I'm going to
health.
sell the car.
I'm sorry?
I'm going to sell the car, go back to Milan and I sell the car.
Yeah, go to Milan. But Milan even understands it too. Huh? Even Milan is changing. If Madrid is changing, you know, in European context, Milan and Madrid are a bit like Los Angeles, you know, everything by car. But even in Madrid, the PPP, which is the conservative party of Madrid, they decided much less cars. If they understand that that's the future, I think it's the future. But it's back to the past, actually.
So when you look back on it now, over all those years, what are the most important things that you have done from social integration and climate change points of view?
We've been very lucky because we end up to have this problem, and problems are always help, to find the right solution. If you don't have a problem, you don't think about solution. Our problem was a big railway yard in the middle of the city, I'm referring to Porta Nuova, and the neighborhoods around were very, very interesting. So, and it was a big problem. How can we cross this situation? And at the end, the conclusion that was almost natural because of the problem was about public spaces. So at the end, we basically create a carpet on top of infrastructure. Now, they become the real distinguishing factor of the project of Porta Nuova. So in a way, we grew up in our development expertise thinking to public space first because it's a way of reconnecting in the right way if you do it right. So even your Japan project, we all heard, the single most important thing is your promenade. But at the end, it's the truth. I mean, it's not just to be good, not to look good. If you do it right, it's great.
So how do you plan to measure? What are your goals, and how do you plan to measure them as the project goes forward? We have 2 minutes left.
Well, they have very aggressive sustainability goals. I think that would be a key report card on that. I think this will be, you can measure this, but I think what will be very interesting is when the project is complete, when the 1.6 kilometers of the promenade is functioning, is to absolutely observe to see how the space is used. Is it being used as intended? Are people going there by choice, not just to go to the rail station?
And be willing to make a vertical change to do it.
Exactly.
Michael, how will the project that Tishman Speyer is taking forward get these, achieve climate goals?
I think it really, it ties straight to what the city had really been after in setting the plan, which was to, open up. And I think that it is the public space that'll be the thing that's in the public mind. And I think it'll be, San Francisco's got a lot of examples of unsuccessful not development, but just the streets are oftentimes, they're great neighborhoods. You get into the residential areas of San Francisco, there's a totally different feel from the commercial areas, right? Mm-hmm. This is a mixed-use area, which really should be the first example of a place where you actually, there are people working and living, and actually it should work in a European style.
I actually find frequently it's getting people to modify their behavior the first time that is the hardest. Yeah. It becomes easily replicable once people understand that they're not the only ones, but they too are frankly enjoying ditching those extra elements of load that don't really matter. Yeah. In closing, I'd like to say to you, Pascal, we've always, as designers of urban places, valued the situation more frequently in Europe and in some places in Asia, that there is on the public side a voice for design. So I'll give you a chance to say a final word, but I also want to say to you, thank you very much for standing up for that responsibility, because it does make it more possible for us to accomplish the kind of things we want to accomplish. So your last word?
Oh, it's so nice to give public authority the last word. Huh? It's wonderful. But let's just say, let's work together. Again, I think we both have this win-win situation that we can make better cities. Finally, when cities where people are happy, they will consume more, they will be more outdoor, they will be better human beings, and that's what it's all about, I think, and we should not forget. It's about living together, quality of life. We can do that by bringing people together to build nice buildings. It's beautiful to see, and you mentioned Europe, we are in some way the continent where cities were born, and so we have this moral responsibility to keep it high, and we will do it. But I'm so glad to see that United States is changing too. So, thank you very much.
So my challenge to all of you is, when you look at the rise of temperature that is going to most likely descend on our cities over the next 2 or 3 decades, and we look at the projects we're building now, are we taking it into consideration that humans most likely don't want to live 95% of the hours of their life inside? And so how are we working? Because I agree with the question of the importance of the public realm. How are we working to respond to that challenge, which is certainly coming? Only one of many, but one that I think really specifically affects us as we lay out the plans for our cities. Thank you all for bringing your inspiration to us. Thank you all very much.